Welcome back to the Haircafe Cinematic Universe, hair loss switchers. Remember, a finasteride a day keeps the hair transplant doctor away. So, do any of you guys remember the video I made about a month ago where I responded to FaceIQ, who himself responded to one of my videos where I criticized the carnivore diet? Well, he's now back with a new response because I guess he can't just let this thing go. Now, I knew this video was coming because one of my viewers told me that FaceIQ had created a community post where he announced that he wasn't just making a video. No, he was going to make a video that was going to be one of the highest effort videos on his entire channel. That was over 4 weeks ago, so my expectations were that his video was going to be of extremely high quality with high production values, and of course, most importantly, is going to be backed by evidence-based scientific research. But I have never been more wrong before in my entire life.
This is very boring for me, honestly.
After watching the video, it is obvious that FaceIQ did not want to make this video, and the only reason he did so was because he felt peer pressure from his viewers who kept asking him over and over again when the video was coming out. So, after weeks of preparation and hype, what did FaceIQ actually deliver? Well, it's just another lazy livestream like his first response video, although this time he came more prepared since he brings up a minimal amount of scientific research of his own in an attempt to debunk me. But he doesn't even get through my entire video. He quits about a third of the way through it. He says in the video that he's very tired, and I believe him, because his whole attempt at a response is very low energy.
No, actually, Lee, this is a boring stream. This is really fucking boring. I don't feel good right now. I'm tired.
He skips large segments of my video, including important points about the nutritional deficiencies of an all-meat diet, as well as the health benefits of the phytochemicals found in plants.
Yeah. There you are, guys. Maybe we could skip ahead. And that doesn't mean it's optimal. Yeah, I think I'm done with this video. He skips over the point I made that the Inuits live on the verge of scurvy and actually get their vitamin C not from meat, but from algae, and they even grow a plant designed specifically to treat scurvy called scurvy grass. He also skips entirely the part of the video on AGEs, which are toxic substances that are much more prevalent in meat than they are in plants. So, he doesn't even bother responding to most of my points, which I'm actually grateful for, I have to be honest, because it makes this video I'm doing now much easier, not to mention a lot shorter. So he starts out being pretty civil like he did in the first video, but as the video gradually goes on, you can tell that he's starting to lose his cool, and he makes a lot of personal attacks against me, which gives me a good opening to blame it on his diet since he constantly blames my demeanor on my diet, but I'm not going to do that. He also frequently misrepresents me as defending a vegan diet in this video, which I wasn't. I was defending an omnivorous diet. But he brings up the vegan straw man more times than I can count, so I'll go ahead and just ignore all that too. He repeatedly says he's bored throughout the stream, and he even encourages his viewers to leave the stream at several points in the video. This is extremely boring for me, I won't lie. Like, people think that he actually debunked me, which we'll get into this stuff. Hopefully, I think it'll pick up. This is just boring as fuck because it's about the definition of a carnivore. Guys, no, you guys can leave the stream. This is boring as fuck, okay? I would much rather be doing face ratings. I would much rather be doing anything else, okay? But no, we don't get to do that. We have to review this now. Okay? Honestly, please leave the stream. Don't even fucking watch this.
FaceIQ, if you don't want to do a response video to me, then don't. No one forced you to respond to my video. But if you're going to respond, then you shouldn't have just given a half-hearted effort, because that made it especially easy for me to come back and explain once again why you're completely wrong, which brings us to the exact same spot we were in before. So, as you might expect, I still disagree with FaceIQ that the carnivore diet is the most natural or healthiest diet. I'm not going to go through his whole video, but I'll just go ahead and comment on the highlights or lowlights, and I'll tell you why I think he is still wrong. So, one of the really annoying things about FaceIQ's original response was that he kept saying throughout the entire video that prehistoric human species that lived before the appearance of Homo sapiens were not human beings. Every time I talked about a human ancestor, he'd say that's not a human. Let's begin with number 10. Number 10 is the fact that plants have been a major part of the diet of humans throughout their entire existence at every time period and at every location they've ever been.
Is this supposed to be a human or?
Yes, it is. That is an illustration.
Yep, I will admit I was kind of not confusing because I obviously understand that hominids are still humans and such. I was referring though to Homo sapiens sapiens, our current speciation. I don't really think anyone should care about anything else but our current species and what our current species eats.
Of a human.
In terms of relating to what our current species should eat. So FaceIQ fortunately concedes in the live stream that he was wrong about the definition of a human, and he clarifies that he meant Homo sapiens. So, good. That's one semantic problem he clears up at the beginning, and props to him for doing so, because we are living in the era where people would rather literally die than admit they're wrong about anything. So this did take some guts from FaceIQ, so no big deal. He meant specifically Homo sapiens, and I appreciate the clarification. But he makes it clear that he is only interested in the diet of Homo sapiens, and the fact that the early hominid species ate plants doesn't matter to him. So fine, we can ignore the parts of my video that pertain to the diet of humans that lived before Homo sapiens. So the other big semantic issue we both spend probably way too much time in both of our videos on was the proper definition of what a carnivore is. What I was trying to point out in my video was that the emotionally charged term hypercarnivore really doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. Carnivore dieters like to claim that based on the stable isotope data, humans weren't just carnivores, they were hypercarnivores. This is completely misleading without the proper context, though. It gives people the impression that humans are carnivores in the same sense that a lion or crocodile would be. Carnivore YouTubers online are taking this definition completely out of context, so they're being misleading to their viewers when they say that humans were hypercarnivores. This hypercarnivore terminology comes from a paper written in the 1980s that classified predators according to how much of their diet consisted of meat. Predators like bears, raccoons, and foxes, as well as some ape species, are actually omnivores, but they eat different proportions of meat versus plants. So the terms hypercarnivore, mesocarnivore, and hypocarnivore were invented to classify the behaviors of these animals according to how much meat they eat. But this is just a behavioral classification, and it's different from the physiological classifications of carnivores versus omnivores versus herbivores. So there is a big difference between a behavioral carnivore and a true obligate physiological carnivore like a lion or a crocodile that cannot derive macronutrients from plant-based sources. True carnivores literally need animal protein, or they will starve to death because they cannot derive energy from plants the way humans and other true omnivorous animals can. So, FaceIQ is right that this is just a semantics discussion, but it's still important to bring up anyways, because carnivore dieters are the ones who like to claim that ancient humans weren't just carnivores, they were hypercarnivores, which sounds much more impressive than it really is. 30% of your diet could come from plants, and you'd still be labeled as a hypercarnivore according to this classification scheme, but that's a far cry from eating nearly 100% meat like a true obligate carnivore like a lion or crocodile would. In fact, after a lot of back and forth, FaceIQ sort of concedes the point that humans are omnivores, but then he says it doesn't matter because the optimal diet is still a heavily meat-based diet.
I'm not interested in that, honestly. So I would even concede this, and you can call a human an omnivore if you think they are. The point is we are meat dominant, very meat dominant. Meat is what is providing our essential nutrition, not apples.
But FaceIQ still can't seem to make up his mind about this. It's like he really wants to make the case that humans are true carnivores, but he doesn't have the data to qualify that claim. He says that we have retained some ability to digest plants from our evolutionary past when human ancestors had a more herbivorous diet. For example, he says the reason that humans still have the salivary amylase enzymes is because we used to eat plants and there was no evolutionary pressures for humans to lose these enzymes once they started eating meat.
There was no evolutionary pressure to make us lose our salivary amylase enzyme. There was no pressure that would say it's detrimental to be able to use starches or fruit as fuel. Obviously, doesn't mean it's ideal for us or optimal.
But then he claims that we really can't properly eat plants because we have a relatively small cecum, even though there are other omnivorous animals that also have small cecums like pigs, and there are even some omnivores that have no cecum at all, like bears, so this is hardly a valid point. In the end, though, he concedes that our ability to eat plants was actually a survival advantage, even if in his own mind, a red meat-only diet is still the ideal diet.
Yes, we are more adapted to be able to use more fuel sources than other carnivores simply due to our evolution, our past. We have evolutionary pressures that shaped us so we would remain being able to eat fruits and starches and such. That does not mean those are optimal. It's just an evolutionary advantage to have more fuel sources, as he agreed on.
But the thing is, these omnivorous traits are not just some leftover vestigial remnants of our ancient evolutionary past. They're still in active use today. Humans still produce the salivary amylase enzymes because we still benefit from eating starches. Despite FaceIQ conceding that humans are indeed omnivores, he still tries to blur the distinction between true carnivores and omnivores by claiming that even true carnivores like lions can survive on a plant-based diet. His only evidence for this is an anecdotal report of a lion named Little Tyke who supposedly lived for 9 years on a vegetarian diet.
And in fact, there's actually a vegetarian lion that lived 10 years, which I think will be a point that we'll come back to by Haircafe here.
The big distinction here is that carnivores will starve to death if they don't have meat. Omnivores won't.
Like, false. Let's listen to that again.
Is that carnivores will starve to death if they don't have meat. Omnivores won't.
Alright, so he's just flat out wrong here, and I'll show you an example actually. Here we have something very interesting. Here we have Little Tyke, the vegetarian lion. This lion did not eat any meat for 10 years. And he lived 10 years, about half of what he should have lived, which is what's going to happen to you if you go plant-based or vegan typically, especially vegan. You'll probably live about half as long as you should have. This is a vegetarian lion. I'm not going to go through the entire article, but yep, lived 10 years, no meat. Let's listen to that again.
Consumption. The big distinction here is that carnivores will starve to death if they don't have meat.
Done. Unequivocally false. Done.
So just due to the natural world we live in, yes, every organism on planet Earth is going to consume both plants and animals to a certain extent, but that misses the point. A carnivorous animal like a shark will starve to death if there's no meat in its diet. An herbivorous animal like an elephant...
Well, if you consider a lion carnivorous, again, we have an example of a vegetarian lion without meat that lived 9 years. Okay. There you are.
Though, will starve to death if...
Just patently false. Blatantly. Yeah, there you are.
FaceIQ seems to think this one anecdote about Little Tyke, the adorable vegetarian lion, disproves my claims that true carnivorous animals cannot survive without eating meat, and so he thinks this is checkmate, but it's not. So, this story of Little Tyke the lion is very old. It's from the 1940s. So, supposedly, this baby lion named Tyke was born in a zoo and refused to eat any meat. It was adopted by a human family, and the lion lived for 9 years eating grains, eggs, and milk. However, there is great reason to be highly skeptical of this story. First of all, even if Little Tyke's diet included some animal products like milk and eggs, her diet would still be deficient in taurine. This is very important because humans can synthesize their own taurine, but lions cannot, and taurine deficiency causes blindness and cardiomyopathy in felines. So, even if Little Tyke survived on this diet, she would have been very sick on it. As it turns out, Little Tyke the lion tragically died of pneumonia, most likely due to malnutrition at the age of 9, which is far shorter than the average lifespan of a lion in captivity, which ranges from 15 to 20 years of age. Little Tyke was never examined by any independent veterinarians in order to truly assess her health or her diet. We only have the word of her owner that she ate no meat, and her owner published a book about Tyke and claimed that the existence of Tyke was some kind of biblical miracle. Of course, you only can claim something is a miracle if it goes against accepted science, which is the fact that lions can't live without eating meat. So, given the attention and profitability of this particular lion, it is very possible that this was a complete hoax. It wouldn't be the first time someone perpetuated a hoax for fame and fortune. Religious groups have used the story to claim that Little Tyke was a fulfillment of a biblical prophecy, specifically the verses in the Bible that describe a future where the wolf and the lamb and the lion and the calf will coexist peacefully. In fact, most of the information about Little Tyke can be found on religious and creationist websites like creation.com. So, this story was never confirmed by any scientist and probably falls into the same category as most UFO and Bigfoot sightings. It certainly does not disprove the known biological fact that a lion would starve to death in the wild without eating meat. Humans, on the other hand, will never starve to death if they eat enough plants. It's possible they could develop other health problems if they don't supplement the vitamins found exclusively in meat, like vitamin B12 for instance, but they will never die of starvation like true carnivores would because humans are omnivores, not carnivores. They can get energy from both plants and animal products. So, the story about Little Tyke the lion is cute, but it doesn't disprove what we know about the biology of carnivores, not by a long shot. So, the next big point of contention here in the video is the stable isotope data that supposedly shows that humans in Northern Europe ate a lot of meat during the last ice age that ended about 12,000 years ago. In my video, I made the case that the stable isotope data that FaceIQ venerates overestimates the amount of meat that ancient humans actually ate because of the presence of maggots in the rotting meat that they ate. Primitive humans would often eat the remains of animals killed by other predators because they were scavengers, and so they would eat what was essentially carrion meat. That sounds really gross, gross, but humans are actually naturally scavengers who often ate carrion meat killed by other animals, and this isn't a vestigial trait. Even many modern cultures like the Inuits will regularly eat and enjoy rotting meat. It's even considered a delicacy by them. There are also several African cultures that traditionally eat rotten meat. Humans are unique as they're the only animal that will store meat for later consumption, and ancient humans had no problem eating rotten meat just like many cultures do today. The latest stable isotope data shows that humans ate less meat during the Ice Age than earlier studies indicated. The new data shows that rotting meat by itself is already much higher in stable isotopes than fresh meat, so eating rotten meat falsely elevates the stable isotope levels. However, the presence of maggots drives the stable isotope ratios up even higher, in fact 8 times higher than what's seen in just regular rotting meat. Several times throughout this video, FaceIQ states very confidently that maggots have the same stable isotope ratio as terrestrial animals, but that's just not correct in the slightest. There is new research showing that the stable isotope data overestimates the amount of meat that was eaten by ancient humans.
Let's see his reasoning for that.
That's because it's been shown that the maggots found in rotten meat, which is what our so-called apex predator ancestors mostly ate, massively increase the amount of stable isotopes in their bones. This is because...
Yeah, his maggot theory has a few issues, which we'll let him finish his point and I'll debunk it.
Maggots contain a much higher nitrogen stable isotope ratio than terrestrial animals, so this makes it look like we were...
That's false, by the way. Actually, it's very, very similar to herbivores. Interesting. I didn't catch that flaw the first time.
Eating a lot more meat than we really were.
Also, maggots are also an animal food, by the way, Haircafe. Just saying.
The new data shows that rotting meat has increased stable isotope ratios, largely because of the presence of maggots in the meat, since the
It's actually extremely close to herbivorous meat. False.
So, based on this new data, archaeologists have concluded that early humans and Neanderthals did not eat as much meat as what was previously thought. They were not hypercarnivores or ubercarnivores. So FaceIQ backs up his claim by saying that humans had higher stable isotope ratios than lions or wolves. If the ratios are indeed higher than obligate carnivores like lions and wolves, then that is more evidence the ratios are being falsely augmented. Because, just think about this, use some damn common sense. How could humans possibly eat more meat than lions or wolves? These animals eat their meat freshly killed, and so they don't consume a lot of rotting meat with maggots. So, it's very clear here that the diet of ancient humans falsely increased the stable isotope levels, and these levels can't be relied upon to estimate how much meat these humans were actually eating. FaceIQ then tries to back up what he claims about the stable isotope data by bringing up other isotope data like the zinc isotope data from tooth enamel and also data from carbon-13 analysis. No, there isn't that much data. We know this because collagen deteriorates completely after 50,000 years, so the
Good thing we have enamel,
research cannot go back any...
which shows the same thing. Let's see if I can pull that up as well. Oh yeah, zinc isotopes, here we are. These don't degrade the same way as collagen, so we'll take a look at this. And again, this shows carnivore level trophic position once again. It's just the fact he's trying to claim like the humans were not severely meat based, if not just purely carnivore, it's such a cope. Like, it just doesn't hold up with anything. Thank you. Also, we can still see what type of meat we're eating with the carbon-13 data, and that was herbivorous meat.
So first he claims that the zinc isotope studies prove that prehistoric Homo sapiens were carnivores, and he looks up a study, but he doesn't actually show the study on screen, and I can think of a pretty good reason why, and that's because the data shows the exact opposite of what he's actually saying. First of all, it is true that zinc isotopes can help distinguish between the diet of a carnivore, an omnivore, and an herbivore, as you can see in this chart, but in reality, the zinc isotope studies that have been done show that ancient humans were actually omnivores. Here's a study on ancient humans in Laos where the zinc isotope data confirmed that the diet was omnivorous, and these were actual Homo sapiens we're talking about here who were living between 40 and 60,000 years ago. These weren't ancient hominids. A similar study was done on late Stone Age hunter-gatherers living about 15,000 years ago, so even more recent. To quote the study, quote, "Our results unequivocally demonstrate a substantial plant-based component in the diets of these hunter-gatherers," unquote. So I guess FaceIQ is forgetting what the gatherer part of hunter-gatherer refers to. Also, he brings up the carbon-13 data, but he fails to mention that carbon-13 analysis can't determine how much of the isotope came from plants versus animals who eat plants, so it is completely useless in trying to determine how much of the diet came from plants versus animals. So, carbon-13 isn't a reliable metric to determine what our diets looked like in ancient times. All this research debunks the idea that humans were hyper-carnivores. Even during the Ice Age in Northern Europe, there is no good evidence that humans met the criteria of being hyper-carnivores at any point during the Ice Age. The newest data proves that this was not the case. Also, the idea that there were no plants available for human consumption during the Ice Age is just flat out wrong. People are acting like there were no plant foods around during the Ice Age because the land was just some frozen desert like Antarctica is today. But that's completely incorrect. Plants adapted and obviously survived the Ice Age, or they wouldn't still be here today. The fact is that even during the Ice Age, there was plentiful plant life all over the world except for Antarctica, of course. If the Ice Age was just some frozen wasteland, then there would have been no herbivores during that time, but there were plenty of them, including non-ruminant herbivores like the woolly mammoth and the woolly rhinoceros. It makes perfect sense that these animals existed, because if herbivorous animal species can evolve to survive in colder climates, then why wouldn't plants be able to evolve to do the exact same thing? There are plenty of edible plant species that existed during the Ice Age in Northern Europe, like berries, tubers, nuts, seeds, and legumes. If herbivorous animals were able to survive in the Ice Age despite not being even capable of surviving on meat, then certainly humans could have found plant sources of food too, especially since we have archaeological data showing that our hominid ancestors have used tools to cultivate and harvest plants as far back as 780,000 years ago. Also, there's just something I have to talk about because I haven't heard anyone else bring this up. This argument about all humans being forced to eat meat during the Ice Age because there are no plant species available is really ethnocentric. It's not like ancient humans only existed in the cold, harsh climates of Europe. Humans originated in Africa, which is closer to the equator and has tropical regions that are abundant with edible plant life all year round, even during the winter. Humans migrated to Europe only about 50,000 years ago, but many humans stayed behind in the warm tropics. Humans spread out, but they didn't abandon the regions where they came from. Even 50,000 years ago, there were humans living in Africa, in the Middle East, in India, and in other regions that are close to the equator, which still would have been warm and tropical even during the Ice Age. In fact, there were more tropical regions back then than there are today, since human activity has destroyed most of the rainforest to create cattle feedlots in order to meet the astronomical demand for beef today, largely thanks to pro-meat propagandists like FaceIQ. People living in the tropics would not have been forced to change their diet to eat more meat during the Ice Age. The tropics were largely unaffected by the Ice Age. The Ice Age did not turn planet Earth into a giant snowball. There was still plentiful vegetation that humans could have eaten no matter where they were. And even if there were regions where vegetation was scarce and humans were forced to eat more meat than plants, that doesn't mean that a meat-only diet is a natural diet. People are capable of adapting their diet to whatever is available to them, but that in itself doesn't tell us what the healthiest diet is. It only tells us what we are capable of doing in order to survive. So, in the end, all these archaeological arguments don't tell us anything about what we should be eating. They all just boil down to an appeal to nature fallacy, and as I've already shown, there's good reason to doubt that humans even ate as much meat as the carnivore cultists claim, because the stable isotope data is completely unreliable.
So if we were to map our current Homo sapiens sapiens speciation on a 24-hour clock, we've been eating plants, agricultural farming, for around 30 minutes of that 24-hour clock of our species, to kind of as an analogy there. A systematic review of what happened to populations when they switched from eating the 80% or more meat to farming. And this is what happened. So, in 19 of 21 societies undergoing agricultural transformation, we saw a decrease in adult height and a general reduction in overall health. This also includes the size of the skull, the robusticity of the skeleton, the occlusion, in 19 of 21 societies as they transitioned to start farming plants. So anthropology is a hard science. This is a good example of what actually was seen in the skeletons when we started farming plants.
So FaceIQ tries to shift the goalpost here since skeletal height isn't anything I discussed in my original video. He claims that agriculture has resulted in a decrease in the average height of human beings. He's also implying that humans rarely ate plants until around 11,000 years ago when they suddenly invented agriculture, which would be a pretty strange thing for a species that avoided eating plants for so long to suddenly do. I mean, if meat was the natural diet of the species, why did humans first invent agriculture to harvest plants rather than come up with something like cattle farming first? It doesn't make any sense to me. Also, this claim by FaceIQ completely contradicts his epistemology. FaceIQ repeated claims that you can't prove causation from an association, like right here. There's data showing that increased red meat consumption correlates with an
Okay, then you can shut up then. No thank you. We're not interested in that. It's not scientific. You should have learned association can never establish on causation, ever, under any circumstance, according to the scientific method. So, enough of that.
increased risk of... Despite this, he notes that there was an association between the start of agriculture and the shrinkage of the skeleton and the skull, and he's claiming that one thing caused the other. He's blaming our decreased height on the consumption of plants. So that's a cause and effect that he's deriving from just an association. According to his own epistemology, this is something that cannot be established, but he established it anyways because it favors his biases. So he's totally contradicting himself here, but hypocrisy aside, he's still completely wrong. During the agricultural revolution, which started around 11,000 years ago, the human population increased dramatically, and many major changes occurred in the life of human beings. It was the beginning of civilization. With civilization, life was much different than the life of a hunter-gatherer. Tribes evolved into large-scale societies, and with these societies, there were more densely populated settlements, greater divisions in labor, and a hierarchy of social status. People became dependent on crop production for their food sources, and so things like crop failures due to natural disasters like droughts would cause famine. In addition to that, crowding and poor sanitation led to increased infectious diseases, and all this likely led to both poor nutrition and a loss of skeletal height compared to the Paleolithic era. Given all these factors, it is simplistic and naive to assume that just eating plants caused humans to get shorter. These changes in stature and health were a consequence of humanity's painful transition into a new form of living that hadn't been perfected yet. However, human civilization would not have been possible without agriculture. The early problems with agriculture have been solved, and agricultural production has scaled up as the population of humanity has increased. And in fact, the average human height has been on the rise, especially in the past 150 years due to improved food availability and healthcare. But unlike FaceIQ, I'm not going to attribute height solely due to changes in diet. Just like with the onset of agriculture, the factors are way more complex than that, and clearly the fact that height has been increasing despite agriculture being at a higher production than it ever has been in human history, that clearly shows that it's not agriculture that causes a decrease in human height.
It's funny, we're eating less red meat. Let me make sure I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. I believe we're eating less red meat per capita in America. Trends of red meat consumption per capita, USA. Oh, here we are. Beef consumption decreasing from about 97 pounds per capita to around 58 pounds. So it looks like our red meat consumptions went down by about 33%, yet atherosclerosis is steadily going up. Normally, if there is a causal mechanism, you would see the associations matching. So red meat is the issue, right? Yet we're eating less red meat and having more atherosclerosis. So your mechanism doesn't really seem to be playing out, does it?
So here FaceIQ criticizes me for saying that meat consumption has been increasing, but he notes that red meat consumption actually is down. So I was talking about meat in general, and meat consumption overall has still definitely gone up, but he's right that people have cut down on red meat, and that is largely due to the well-founded health concerns about red meat consumption. However, he's wrong when he says atherosclerosis has gone up despite red meat consumption going down. He's completely wrong. The mortality from heart disease and stroke has dropped considerably since the middle of the 20th century, which is around the time that the American Heart Association recommended that people cut down on their consumption of saturated fat. It's also around the time when people started replacing saturated fats like lard and tallow with seed oils. And it's during this period of time that the consumption of red meat has gone down considerably. So there are a lot of factors to explain why rates of atherosclerosis and heart disease have been dropping during the past century, but FaceIQ's claim that heart disease has been going up is just flat out wrong. Once again, despite FaceIQ claiming that you can't infer causation from associations, he is promoting the idea that a decrease in red meat consumption has caused an increase in atherosclerosis, though of course he gets this backwards. But it's interesting to me how it's only the studies that prove him wrong where he says you can't derive causation from associative data. Anyways, I don't think you can show from this data that the decrease in red meat consumption is the sole cause for the decrease in cardiovascular mortality in the last 70 years. There are many other factors as well. There has also been a decrease in smoking, and there are new medications to treat the risk factors for heart disease, like high blood pressure, diabetes, and hypercholesterolemia. There have also been new surgical and catheter techniques developed to treat heart disease. But certainly, the changes in diet since the middle of the 20th century have not increased the rate of heart disease like FaceIQ is claiming. If anything, they're lowering it. So like I said, FaceIQ doesn't believe nutrition science can establish causation, which is completely hypocritical since he already made several causative claims in his own video. But he specifically criticizes clinical trials on nutrition, saying that they cannot establish causation. He has this extremely austere view on how human research in general should be done. He thinks that humans basically have to be locked in controlled environments and be monitored 24/7 for years, and they have to have identical genetics, or else you can never eliminate all the confounding factors, so therefore all clinical research is basically useless. This is not just associative data. We have randomized control studies done on the Mediterranean
They're not fully controlled. False.
diet, which shows that it has a much lower incidence of heart disease than any other diet.
Incidence in those people doing those things. Oh, wait, did they adhere to them, though? Oh, they didn't? Oh, wait, we have to kind of mess with the observation. Oh, it's not science. Okay, done. Wait, were they genetically identical? Oh, no, they weren't. Okay, done.
Absolutely no data on any carnivore-style diets. But
yeah, there's no data on any diet that's actually good. Except we have the anthropology of people eating 80% to up to 98% meat in the Ice Age. So, you know.
this is a non-falsifiable position he's taking here, because there is no research you can do to prove him wrong. He's imposing impossible standards on research which aren't even necessary, just so he can reject any research that doesn't tell him what he wants to hear. That's a very convenient philosophy to have, because it allows him to reject, without any further analysis, the hundreds of studies showing the links between saturated fat consumption, LDL cholesterol, and heart disease. All these studies are consistent, but he ignores them all because they actually indicate that his diet is unhealthy. That's why this guy always wants to do live debates with people, because he's taking a position that handicaps his opponents, since he's claiming only the research he presents is valid and any other research that he disagrees with is automatically invalid. So, FaceIQ's view on nutrition science is based on a misunderstanding of how randomized controlled trials work. And I don't want to single out FaceIQ here, because literally every single pro-carnivore influencer on YouTube, without exception, makes this very same mistake. I mean, just think of any carnivore influencer, and I can guarantee you that they've all made this error when they make their arguments, whether it's Eddie Goki, Bart K, The Butter Thought, or anyone else you've possibly ever heard of. None of them understand the importance of randomization. The way a randomized controlled trial is designed is that it already eliminates all the confounding variables that FaceIQ is worried about. The way it does this is by randomizing the treatment between two or more large groups. This ensures that the distribution of genetics and other confounding variables like lifestyle are the same in both groups. The only thing that is different between the two groups is the treatment. So, if the treatment group shows a statistically significant difference compared to the control group, we can infer that the treatment is what caused the difference. This is literally the backbone of modern medicine as we know it. Every prescription drug you see on the market, literally every scientific conclusion we've ever made about health has been determined by this form of research. This form of research has not only shown the benefits of certain treatments, it has also proven that certain treatments that were thought to be effective were actually ineffective or even harmful. Like, for example, it used to be believed that drugs that raise HDL levels, which is considered the good cholesterol, would help fight heart disease. Randomized controlled trials, however, showed that they don't actually help at all, and that high HDL levels are more associated with good health as opposed to playing a causative role in any positive health outcomes. So, even though the mechanism and the theory sounded good on paper, the outcome data proved that it wasn't as helpful as people hoped it would be. So, a randomized controlled trial is far more important than any mechanistic vomit about the Randall cycle or deuterium. But since randomized controlled studies don't tell the carnivore gurus what they want to hear, they pretend they're all completely useless, and they try to shift the discussion to mechanism and anthropology. They claim that only mechanistic and anthropological data is important, even though they are wrong about the anthropological data, as I already explained earlier, and mechanistic data is only useful for generating hypotheses. Mechanism always has to be confirmed with outcome data in order for it to be considered valid. For all the concerns that FaceIQ has about confounding variables, it is actually mechanistic data that is the most subject to confounding variables, and it is outcome data that is the least affected by confounding variables. That's because mechanisms don't exist in isolation in the human body. There are literally millions of biochemical reactions all happening at once in the human body. Every single one of those biochemical reactions could be a confounding variable, which is why you need outcome data to verify a mechanism. So, even if we see a mechanism that makes logical sense, we could only be looking at a tiny fraction of the big picture, and there could easily be counter-reactions that negate whatever mechanistic hypothesis we present. That's why a mechanism can only be used to establish a hypothesis. It cannot be used to infer any kind of causation. So all the talks about the Randle cycle, anti-nutrients, and deuterium do not matter in the absence of outcome data that confirm whatever hypothesis FaceIQ posits about them. That's just how science works here, chooms. If you want to learn more about the rationale behind randomized control trials, check out this great article that I'll put in the sources in the description below. FaceIQ, I hope you check it out too. Randomized control trials aren't just good for making health claims, they're essential for them. Now, is it possible for a randomized control trial to be wrong? Yes, it is possible, especially if it's a poorly designed study or has a very small number of subjects, but that's why we also have meta-analyses. A meta-analysis is basically a study of studies, and when you have dozens or hundreds of randomized control trials that all show the same outcome, then guess what? You have a reproducible result. That's what we see in the data on LDL cholesterol and heart disease. Each point on this graph is not a subject. It's a study containing hundreds of subjects. The graph shows the tight correlation between LDL levels and the risk of coronary heart disease. This graph includes randomized control studies in which the LDL is lowered using diet or multiple different drugs. This data is impressive to anyone who understands what they're looking at, yet all the carnivore hacks like to just dismiss it by repeating the magical incantation, association can't prove causation. So, if somebody wants to claim that all this data is worthless, then they're just being needlessly obtuse. But in the case of FaceIQ, he's not being intellectually consistent here, since he will enthusiastically promote any nutrition science that supports his biases. Case in point, here he brings up a paper that supposedly shows that a keto diet doesn't increase LDL cholesterol in humans when they eat red meat.
I wonder if he even read this. They eat red meat in what context? Again, let me pull up. Actually, I have a good reference about this as well. Let's look at something very interesting. Let's look at something. This is interesting. All right. So the main thing I believe, and this is not specifically red meat, but it seems that he's on about also later in the video, he talks about LDL and ApoB, LDL-C, being causal for heart disease, which that's already false. You'll never be able to prove that causation. It's still a hypothesis. But anyways, let's look at this. Let's look at, so this is a keto study, okay? So these are people on low sugar diets that are also eating lots of meat, okay? These people had a mean of, I believe it was 270 LDL-C, roughly 272. Oh, this isn't the, I think this is just the 1 year study. In lean metabolically healthy people on a ketogenic diet, neither total exposure nor changes in baseline levels of ApoB or LDL-C were even associated with changes in plaque. So yeah, I think this was just the 1 year one. I have another one as well, which is a 5 year follow-up. Is this Budoff et al? Yeah, it is. Okay, let's look at this one. This one I think is stronger. Wait. Yeah, here we are. This one's stronger. Okay, so here we have ketogenic dieters, because your metabolic context matters, by the way, if you're eating red meat, so it seems. So here we have ketogenic dieters with a mean LDL cholesterol of 272, and some people had up to 590 LDL-C, okay? And they tracked their coronary artery plaque progression with CT scans over 4.7 years. Guess what they found in metabolically healthy individuals on a ketogenic diet? Guess what? Coronary plaque in metabolically healthy individuals with carbohydrate restriction with a chronically high LDL, according to their definitions of the value statement, on keto for a mean of 4.7 years is not greater than a matched cohort with lower average LDL-C significantly. You have the LDL, that's the cohort, and then you have the high LDL people on a ketogenic diet. For over 4.7 years of CT coronary artery scans, the plaque did not progress more than the cohort. So if there was causality between LDL-C and ApoB and atherosclerotic plaque development, why was there no further progression in these very high LDL people? That's interesting.
So, how could he draw a conclusion from this one tiny study but ignore the data from a meta-analysis that includes dozens of studies and hundreds of thousands of subjects that all show the same conclusion? So, does this one study really overturn the hundreds of studies that show that increased LDL cholesterol is strongly associated with progression of atherosclerosis? No, it doesn't. Not at all. FaceIQ makes it sound like the study lasted for 4.7 years, but actually was just a one-year study that looked at the progression of atherosclerosis in 100 men on a ketogenic diet. The study supposedly showed no correlation between LDL-C levels and coronary plaque progression over the year of the study. That's actually not surprising because the LDL-C levels didn't change much during the year-long study. The levels just remained high, much higher than the recommended LDL levels as they should be. However, soon after this study was published, other researchers cried foul. The study authors actually hid the primary result of the study, specifically that the coronary atherosclerosis rapidly got worse during the 1 year of the study. The published endpoint of the study was to look at the change in the amount of non-calcified coronary artery plaque over the course of the year. But the authors didn't even mention this endpoint in the paper. When they were called out for it on social media, one of the authors published the results. The real results showed that the amount of soft plaque increased significantly in these men on the ketogenic diet by 18.8 cubic millimeters. This was a 43% increase over baseline, and it was 4 times what would be expected in healthy individuals. Another huge flaw of this study was that there was no control group. But the biggest problem with this study by far is that the main result was hidden. Specifically, that coronary artery disease progressed significantly in these men over a course of just 1 year, which is completely consistent with their elevated cholesterol levels. Given that the authors had ties with the keto diet industry, it's no surprise that they wanted to hide these results. One of them had even written a ketogenic cookbook. So, this study is completely bogus, and it's been called out by numerous scientists, and I'll list those references in the sources below. Of course, FaceIQ in his superficial analysis of the study doesn't realize any of this, but that's FaceIQ's MO. Throw out some misinterpreted data, say, done, we're done, and then move on. FaceIQ then gets really upset when I showed evidence that humans were cooking meat, in this case fish, 780,000 years ago, and will therefore overestimate the amount of meat consumption since early humans have been cooking meat for hundreds of thousands of years.
The cooking thing seems to have a 2% effect. Very minimal.
Also, even though the authors are claiming that
there's no evidence we've been cooking for hundreds of thousands of years. This is true. There's things that may point in that direction, but there's not like unequivocal proof.
Wrong. We do have evidence that humans have been cooking meat for hundreds of thousands of years. There is strong evidence from archaeological sites that the cooking of meat has been done for at least 7...
There's evidence that animals had been burned. There's not. That's it.
780,000 years and possibly even longer. So
by the way, isotopes cannot determine if the food was cooked or not, by the way. Like, there's really no actual hard evidence. There's just proof that animals have been burned, but there's many reasons to process an animal. So
actually, these burnt animals were found in hearths that were built by these humans. And if you don't know what a hearth is a primitive fire pit. So why would humans burn animals in a fire pit if they weren't going to cook and eat them? I think FaceIQ just doesn't like the idea that people have been cooking their meat for hundreds of thousands of years because he knows that cooked meat lacks some of the nutrients of raw meat, and this goes against his belief that eating raw meat is the natural diet of human beings. Cooking meat was a great invention though, because cooking kills bacteria and parasites found in raw meat that can be deadly, as we see with the Maasai culture with its terribly short lifespan that is largely related to the consumption of raw meat and raw milk. Of course, cooking meat and decreasing the nutrients in meat is not a problem in humans that are also consuming plants because all the essential nutrients are present in an omnivorous diet. So next up, FaceIQ spends some time casting aspersions on the Okinawans. He accuses them of lying about their age in order to get pension checks. FaceIQ then brings up as a counterpoint to the long lifespans in the blue zones, the fact that there is also a long lifespan in Hong Kong where there is supposedly a lot of meat consumption. Out of this data. Meanwhile, the Okinawan Japanese have an average lifespan of about 80 to...
And Hong Kong have an average higher lifespan. They eat more meat than anyone else on Earth. if we're going to use associations. Okay, so the longest living country eats the most meat as well. If we're going to use associations, it's just foolish, isn't it?
This apparent increase in meat consumption within Hong Kong is a very recent phenomenon, just occurring in the last few years or so, as you can clearly see from this graph from Bloomberg. So this is way too recent of a phenomenon to be reflected in longevity statistics. Also, it looks like this increase may not actually be due to increased consumption, but rather increased production. That's because mainland China has been importing more and more meat from foreign countries. However, it appears that these Hong Kong numbers are inflated because Hong Kong is used as a port to smuggle beef into mainland China. Also, this large amount of supposed beef consumption in Hong Kong has actually dropped by 42% in the past 2 years. Also, there are a lot of reasons why Hong Kongers have good longevity in general. Like most Asians from that part of the world, the diet is high in vegetables, including sea vegetables, which are high in heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids, and they also consume a lot of fish, which is low in saturated fat. They also drink a lot of green tea that has antioxidants that have been associated with longer lifespans in epidemiological studies. In addition to that, Hong Kong has one of the highest standards of living in the entire world, with an excellent free public healthcare system. They also have low smoking rates and higher amounts of walking as well as other physical activities compared to Western cultures. So the argument is much more nuanced than FaceIQ is letting on here, especially since we don't actually know how much meat Hong Kongers eat, since the high production is mostly for exports to mainland China. If you really want to look at a diet that is meat heavy, then let's look at the Maasai and the Inuit cultures, who have much shorter lifespans than their neighbors who eat a more balanced diet. But with the Maasai in particular, FaceIQ wants to blame their short lifespan on confounding factors.
Then you have people like the Maasai, the Inuit, where it almost is 100% raw meat.
I don't know why the carnivore community keeps up bringing up the Maasai and Inuit as prime examples of how humans should live. The average lifespan of the Maasai is 55 to 60 years, and the average...
So, there's confounders there. It's not just, you're not just testing for diet or something.
So, if you want to blame the short lifespan of the Maasai on negative confounding factors like their poor healthcare, then you should also take into consideration the positive confounding factors in Hong Kong. When I pointed out the short lifespan of the Maasai in my video, FaceIQ at first said he didn't care, even though carnivore dieters always bring up the Maasai as an example of the carnivore diet promoting longevity. Then he claimed that the short lifespan of the Maasai is just because the Maasai are now westernized.
Excluding infant mortality, it was like, 87. They have great health markers, eating a ton of red meat.
The average lifespan of the Maasai is not 87 years old. It doesn't even come anywhere close to that.
Not anymore. There was a period, though.
Even if you include factors like infant mortality. I actually researched this, and I think I know where he got this information. It's because there's this article that was about an 87-year-old Maasai elder chief named Ole Tokona, I think that's how it's pronounced, and he was actually interviewed by a Western journalist to help make a strong case for Western medicine for the Maasai community. The actual average lifespan of the Maasai is 55 to 60 years old. And funny enough, one of the reasons why they have such a high mortality is because of parasitic infections due to raw meat consumption. Another study...
That's not exactly it. It's one thing they have, and firstly, the parasites, you'd have to first prove that's what's killing them. Secondly, it's because they live in a very dirty environment, by the way. And by the way, those modern Maasai also are eating now cornmeal. They go wear Adidas clothes. But
This is completely false. All the data I presented on the lifespans of the Maasai comes from research done before they were westernized. So again, FaceIQ doesn't actually bother to read the references I gave him. The data was collected before the 1960s, which was well before any Western influence may have corrupted their diet. So you can't blame their short lifespan on Adidas clothes, iPhones, or PlayStation 5s. The Maasai are not paragons of good health, and they never have been. So it's time for the carnivore dieters to stop exploiting these poor people for their propaganda. Looking to the Maasai as an example of good health is like looking to the Cleveland Browns as an example of a good football team. It's just a joke at this point. So after this, he just starts skipping ahead and then he just gives up completely.
And that doesn't mean it's optimal. Yeah, I think I'm done with this video.
After this, he spends the rest of the video talking about some app that he has in development. I mean, fine, whatever, that's all cool. He also complains several times about how he hates doing this and would prefer to do a live debate instead.
Honestly, it's just so boring, bro. Like, I mean, I'd rather just debate him live.
If we were debating something more subjective or more philosophical, I would actually be fine with that. But we're talking about science here. Science is not something that is established or determined by who performs the best on a debate podium. When someone makes a scientific claim, the best way to respond to them is with scientific research, and that cannot be done on the fly. FaceIQ is wrong, but the reason why I know he's wrong is because I took the time to research and prove that his claims are false. It's not just something I knew off the top of my head because I'm not a scientist, but I do know how to do scientific research, so it makes sense that FaceIQ would want to have an exchange with me where I can't fact check him as easily. You can get a pretty good idea of what a debate would look like between us just based on how he does these live streams. FaceIQ makes claims that aren't backed up by studies, or he quotes studies that either don't exist at all or have bad methodology. Any research I bring up, he discards immediately because he claimed that you can never establish cause and effect from a clinical study, even though he makes causal claims all the time for his own opinions. So, a live debate wouldn't be fair because FaceIQ holds a non-falsifiable position on scientific research where he gets to ignore all of my evidence, but on the other hand, I have to scientifically dismantle any evidence he throws at me, whether it's inaccurate claims about the stable isotope data or anecdotes about cute vegetarian lions. That's not data that can be countered on the fly in the heat of a live debate, and it's unfair that he gets to just ignore all the evidence I present to him, but I have to still debunk all of his bullshit. During a live debate, he could have brought up the story about Little Tyke the lion, which I have never heard of before, or he could have mentioned the Hong Kong fallacy, and without being able to research the story on the spot, I would have been left with no choice but to assume it was true and admit that there is no such thing as an obligate carnivore, or that Hong Kongers really do eat the equivalent of 2 Big Macs per day, but have extremely high longevity despite that. But since I didn't do a live debate and actually took the time to research these claims, I know they're all complete bullshit. So a debate doesn't accomplish anything except making it easier for FaceIQ to gish gallop his way to victory, and why the hell would I make things easier for him like that? Debunking bullshit takes a lot more effort than spreading bullshit, so bullshitters naturally have an unfair advantage in a live debate. It's called Brandolini's Law, and it's why pseudoscientific grifters all over the internet like Joe Rogan prefer to settle things in live debates because it prevents their opponents from being able to form a proper rebuttal since they're speaking to them in a format where they can't do research on the fly. The fact is that for all this talk about cavemen and primitive cultures, the reality is that the only time in human existence that a sizable number of humans have ever been pure carnivores is right now. It's today, in the age of the internet, where a bunch of Gen Z dude bros were raised by their smartphones rather than their parents, and since they grew up without father figures, they were easily seduced by these alpha male influencers who convinced them that eating meat is manly and that plants are woke. So, the bottom line here is that this isn't about health to these people, it's about culture. They're emotionally invested in the carnivore diet because they feel that meat is part of their masculine identity, and they'll go through whatever mental gymnastics are needed to convince themselves that plants are toxic and that eating an all-meat diet will turn them into chads because that's the kind of lifestyle that they find the most appealing, even if it is based on a pack of lies.
Yeah, if y'all thought that he won, then go ahead.
Sorry, FaceIQ, I have to agree with your viewers on this one. I think you should take the hint and seriously consider throwing in the towel. There is no way you're ever going to beat me at this. Doing scientific research is my superpower. Rest assured, you have no chance. Anyways, no hard feelings, bro. I do wish you well, so good luck with your new app and your YouTube channel, and congrats on getting 100k subscribers. As for my viewers, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this long video. I'll be back with some more hair loss content soon, so thank you for watching, take care, and God bless.